Wisdom, it's not something you're born with. It's something you gain, usually over time, or it's shared with you. And you know when you're around wisdom. If you've ever sat next to a senior adult and while they're talking, you realize something more than normal is taking place. It's because they're speaking from a place that's not superficial or hollow. Their words are full of wisdom. What I find incredibly satisfying about wisdom is that when we bump into it, it always has depth and generosity. Psalm 133 is full of wisdom. As a matter of fact, it's one of 12 wisdom psalms found in all of the Psalter. Their purpose is to provide instruction for right living and right faith. But their messaging isn't do this or make sure and don't do that. The wisdom psalms speak with depth and generosity. Take Psalm 133, verse 1. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. It's a simple phrase, but kindred living together in unity, it's anything but simple. And this is what I want to unpack today. So let me ask, what does unity mean to you? It's a question worth pondering. In Parker Palmer's newest book, On the Brink of Everything, Grace, Gravity, and Getting Old, every chapter is an essay that he had penned over the last several years. These essays weave into a tapestry that speaks to the spiritual nature of aging. It's remarkable. Every page is chock full of wisdom. For instance, in 2015, he gave a graduation speech at Naropa University in Boulder, Colorado. He says a lot in this speech, but I'll just share a few nuggets of wisdom that he gives to the graduates, and know that each one of these challenges builds on the other, and it ultimately leads to living out what I see in Psalm 133, living with one another in unity. His first word to the graduates is this: be reckless when it comes to affairs of the heart. What he means is for us to fall madly in love with life. Be passionate about some part of the natural or human worlds and take risks on its behalf. No matter how vulnerable they make us, we must risk for our passions. No one ever died saying, I'm so glad I lived a self-serving, self-protecting, self-centered life. No. Meaning is found when we offer ourselves to the world, our energies, our gifts, our visions, our spirit. For when we do, we experience something altruistic. We find something generative and generous. We must understand, though, that when we risk, we soon learn how little it is we know and how easy it is to fail, which leads to point number 2. Palmer says to grow in love and service, you must value ignorance as much as knowledge, failure as much as success. I hope you're lucky enough to recognize and value your ignorance, and in so doing, you're reminded that there is more to this that this world can teach. There's more than one way to experience God than just your way. Ignorance teaches us that God's love transcends. Number 3, Palmer says that if we integrate ignorance and failure into knowledge and success, then we must do the same with all the alien parts of ourselves. Here's what he means, and this is deep. Every one of us has a shadow side. If we're to try to live in unity, we must acknowledge our shadow's potential. If we don't, then our push for unity spills over into mandated uniformity. Our hearts become poisoned. And if you study history at any period, you know that forced uniformity does not breed unity. It leads to classism, nationalism, sexism, and war. To prevent this from happening, we must learn to take everything that is bright and beautiful in us and introduce it to our shadow. We must let our altruism meet our egotism and generosity meet our greed. Our joy needs to meet our grief. Here lies the true wisdom for Palmer. He knows everything has a shadow. But when we're able to say to ourselves, I am all my shadow as well as my light, then the shadow's power is put in service to the good. Think about the Israelites. They attempted to build a kingdom and tried to defend it with the use of a king. They desperately wanted to be a nation state like those around them, despite God's demand that they are not. And the sad reality is they fail. From their inception, God told Israel that God was their king, but they wanted to be like everyone else. Half of the Old Testament is about Israel wrestling with this decision to split from God's kingship and to start their own. This back and forth is an example of what it looks like to live out of your shadow side and doing so unconsciously. Letting your ego and greed lead your decision making, this is what Parker Palmer is talking about. But eventually Israel comes around, and that's the whole point of Psalm 133. It's right in the middle of what we know as Book 5 of the Psalter, the last and culminating work, reminding Israel and the world that God is ultimately king. Israel comes full circle in the Psalter and is reminded through their ignorance and their failures that they need no king but God. They learn to integrate ignorance and failure into their knowledge and success. And Psalm 133 is their psalmist's reminder that they must do the same with all the alien parts of themselves. But the only way they could get to this conclusion is by doing the hard inner spiritual work of shining light in their shadows. We must do the same. Number 4. Palmer tells the graduating class if they're going to welcome life with a reckless abandon, if they're going to have to use their failure to inform them, and if they're going to have to welcome whatever they find alien in them by embracing both their shadow and their light, then they must also extend the same welcome to whatever they find alien in the outer world. I can't think of a more timely virtue for our world than showing hospitality to the stranger, to those we perceive as alien or other. I read recently that by 2045, the majority of Americans will be people of color. Many people fear this fact, but fear won't help. Diversity is coming. In most places, it's already here. In light of these changes, we must develop a welcoming spirit to whatever we find alien in the world around us. We must greet these changes with openness and love, and be willing to extend the same welcome to whatever we find alien in the outer world. If we're ever going to find unity with our kindred, we must grow beyond being afraid of others or otherness. Unity will not come by avoiding diversity. To truly live in unity means we greet these changes and changing times with a sense of openness and welcome and wonder. How very good and pleasant it is when kindred live together in unity. To live like this, though, we must be willing to attack life with reckless abandon. We must learn from our ignorance and failings. We must welcome the alien parts of us that leave us ignorant. And we must welcome the alien things of this world that are coming to us. This is how unity happens. This is how kindred live together in love. This is how we move forward in wisdom.